an interesting experiment that I wanted to share with you guys, and I hope people will Google this on their own and research it and look it up, is an experiment that was called the still face experiment. It happened in 1978, and it taught us a lot about the relationship between infants, babies, and caregivers, care providers. It was this experiment where researchers had a caregiver interact with a baby, with an infant, and the caregiver, for the purpose of this discussion, I'll say a woman, she would coo and giggle and laugh and play peekaboo and talk to the baby, and the baby would respond with excitement, and the caregiver and the baby would mirror each other's reactions back and forth. Then the researchers asked the caregiver to go into what was called a still face, where the caregiver had absolutely no expression. No matter what the baby did, how the baby responded, this caregiver just stayed completely serious and didn't respond to the baby. So, what they wanted to do was they wanted to research and see how babies get affected when the caregiver doesn't have a response and doesn't engage with the infant. And what they saw was that the infants often went into distress. First, they would try to engage with the caregiver on their own. They would try to get their attention. They would try to call out to them. But when they wouldn't get any response, they would either become fretful and anxious, or they would withdraw completely, and they would not make eye contact with the caregiver. They would look away. And a syndrome came about that they realized, which they've named, and you can look this up, still face syndrome, which is a syndrome that shows up in infants and babies. And some of the signs of still face syndrome is babies who don't interact with adults, don't smile, don't laugh, don't make eye contact, seem anxious, are fussy if they're left alone even for a minute. So many of us, when we hear about the still face experiment or still face syndrome, we would say, well, I would never do that to a baby. I would never have a baby, laughing or smiling or trying to get my attention. I would never choose to ignore a baby who was trying to do that with me. But the truth is, that still face that those caregivers were giving to the babies in that experiment is pretty much very similar to what happens to our faces when we are engaged on our phones and we have our babies or infants around us who are trying to get our attention. The interaction is very similar to the still face experiment, which again I encourage everybody to look up online. Something to keep in mind, because many of us don't realize the damage that actually can be done when we aren't engaging with our babies who are trying to get our attention.